The hotel manager smiled and said, "This room has no cameras, just us." And in that moment, the world outside disappeared. The moment the taxi pulled up to the boutique hotel, exhaustion weighed on every muscle, but the city's quiet evening hum pulled his attention outward. The streetlights reflected softly on the wet pavement, and the scent of rain mingled with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby cafe. He stepped out, stretching his legs, and glanced up at the building, elegant, understated, a place that promised comfort but hinted at secrets hidden behind polished doors. Inside, the lobby was warm, lit with amber lights that made the polished wooden floors gleam. Plush chairs lined the walls, and a faint scent of vanilla lingered in the air. He hesitated at the front desk, still adjusting to the calm that contrasted the city's chaos. She appeared then. The hotel manager, a woman in her early 40s, moved with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. Her posture was upright yet relaxed, and when she smiled, it was subtle but genuine, the kind that reached her eyes first and lingered in the corners of her lips. There was an almost imperceptible vulnerability beneath the surface, a soft exhale, a fleeting glance at the clock, that suggested someone used to carrying responsibility but not immune to small human moments. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm, steady, slightly husky, like it had been shaped by years of experience and careful listening. "Checking in." The brief contact of her hand brushing his as she handed over the key was enough to make the world feel quieter for a moment. He noticed how her fingers were soft yet sure, how her grip lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. He smiled, caught off guard by the ease of the interaction and the subtle electricity that seemed to hum beneath the surface. As she led him to the elevator, he took in small details, the faint scent of her perfume, floral with hints of amber, the way her heels clicked lightly against the floor in a steady rhythm, the way her presence filled the space without being intrusive. She gestured toward the elevator door, and their eyes met briefly, a lingering gaze that felt unspoken yet loaded with curiosity. By the time the elevator doors slid closed, there was a quiet tension between them, an unspoken awareness of each other's presence. He found himself watching her in a new light, someone who balanced authority with warmth, strength with softness. And in that fleeting moment, amid the scent of vanilla and polished wood, the noise of the city felt distant, irrelevant. Something unspoken had begun, an unexpected connection that promised the slow, careful unfolding of trust, attraction, and quiet intrigue. The elevator chimed softly, and he followed her down the quiet hallway toward his room. The walls were lined with soft cream wallpaper, framed with subtle abstract art, and the carpet muffled their footsteps, creating an almost intimate cocoon. Every detail felt carefully chosen, nothing flashy, yet comforting, like the space had been curated to invite relaxation. When she reached his door, she paused, key card in hand, and turned toward him. There was a slight glint in her eyes, a subtle teasing edge to her smile that made his pulse quicken without warning. "This room has no cameras, just us," she said, her voice low, warm, and steady, almost conspiratorial. The words felt ordinary but carried an unexpected weight, like an invitation to a quiet, shared secret. He stepped inside, and the room enveloped him in a comforting warmth. Sunlight streamed through partially drawn curtains, casting golden slats across the bedspread. The faint scent of fresh linen mingled with vanilla from a small candle on the dresser. He noticed the softness of the rug under his shoes and the plush throw casually draped across a chair. The space felt lived in yet pristine, safe yet intimate. She lingered at the doorway, just long enough for their proximity to register. The air between them felt charged but unspoken. Her fingers brushed against his as she handed over a small welcome packet, and though it was only a light touch, the warmth of her hand seemed to linger, tracing an invisible line along his skin. He felt a subtle, unfamiliar flutter in his chest, an awareness of someone noticing him in ways that mattered. Her eyes met his again, steady and unhurried, giving him the strange sensation of being fully seen. He found himself drawn to the quiet confidence she exuded, softened by the gentle vulnerability in her expression, the way her lips twitched with the hint of a private smile, the fleeting hesitation before she stepped back toward the door. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The outside world, with its noise and obligations, felt distant. The room became a small sanctuary where the ordinary rules of life paused, and two people, separated by experience yet connected by a shared quiet, existed solely in that moment. It was the kind of space where something subtle and delicate could begin, a connection not yet defined, but undeniably present. The warmth of her presence, the soft light, the faint scent of her perfume, and the gentle pressure of her touch lingered in the room long after she had stepped away. And for him, in that quiet intimacy, the slow, patient unfolding of something deeper, something neither of them had expected, had already begun. The evening settled around the hotel like a soft blanket, warm and quiet. He sat in the armchair by the window, nursing a glass of water she had brought over, and felt the hum of the city fade into a gentle background murmur. She leaned against the doorway, relaxed but attentive, and their conversation began casually, almost trivially. Books, travel, the minor absurdities of life, the dialogue flowed easily, as though they had known each other longer than the hour that had passed. Yet beneath the light-hearted words, there was a charged awareness, an unspoken observation of details that mattered. The tilt of her head as she listened, the way her eyes softened when he laughed, the subtle brush of her hair from her shoulder that caught the dim light, each movement seemed carefully noted, though neither acknowledged it. At one point, she handed him a small plate of cookies, and their fingers met for the briefest instant. It was casual, almost accidental, yet the warmth of her hand lingering against his sent a small ripple of awareness through him. The touch was not electric in a shocking sense, but quietly potent, a gentle confirmation that the space between them carried weight. He noticed how she gestured while talking, her fingers tracing invisible lines in the air, and how she occasionally glanced at him with a fleeting, soft curiosity, as if measuring him in a way words could not capture. When he spoke about a book that had meant something to him, she nodded thoughtfully, leaning in slightly. The faint brush of her shoulder against his arm was unintentional, but it felt intimate nonetheless, a small reminder of her presence. The room itself seemed to mirror their quiet connection. The warm lamplight cast soft pools of gold across the floor and furniture, and the faint scent of vanilla and fresh linen lingered, mingling with the subtle, floral note of her perfume. Even silence between them carried meaning, the comfortable pause after a shared joke, the quiet exhalation when a thought hung in the air, unspoken but understood. By the end of the evening, he realized that the connection was deeper than attraction alone. It was curiosity, empathy, and a subtle, unspoken desire to understand her, to notice the small details, to witness the moments of quiet grace in her presence. The casual gestures, the fleeting touches, and the soft laughter had built a bridge of intimacy neither of them had rushed to cross but both were quietly eager to explore. As the night settled into quiet stillness, he felt an unexpected warmth settle in his chest, a recognition that this evening had shifted something subtly, irreversibly. Their slow, gentle rhythm had begun, a dance of attention, observation, and unspoken connection that promised more than either had anticipated. The night had deepened outside, painting the hotel room in muted shades of gold and shadow. He found himself leaning back in the armchair, watching her move about the space with the quiet, unhurried grace that had drawn his attention from the start. Yet there was a subtle shift in her demeanor tonight, a vulnerability that had not been there in the casual ease of earlier conversation. As they talked about their lives, the conversation drifted to more personal territory. She shared small fragments of her past, carefully chosen, revealing glimpses of struggles and quiet disappointments. A project that hadn't gone as planned, a friendship that had faded, a moment when she felt overlooked or misunderstood, nothing dramatic, yet each detail painted a picture of someone who carried responsibility and wisdom, but also quietly longed for understanding. He felt a tug in his chest, an instinct to comfort, to show that he was not merely observing her, but truly noticing her. Yet there was hesitation, a delicate self-consciousness that made him pause. The age difference, the social implications, the careful boundaries of professionalism, all of it whispered caution. Still, his eyes followed her, tracing the subtle curve of her smile, the way her shoulders softened when she laughed at her own minor frustration, the warmth in her voice even as she admitted uncertainty. At one point, she sank into the armchair across from him, resting her hands lightly on her knees. He noticed the tension in her posture, the slight inward pull of her shoulders, signs of hesitation, perhaps self-protection. He leaned forward slightly, and she glanced up, her eyes meeting his in a long, unspoken moment. Their proximity was close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, yet distant enough to preserve space, a careful balance between intimacy and respect. A subtle, lingering brush of her hand against the arm of the chair as she adjusted her position sent a quiet shiver through him. It was unintentional, he was sure, yet he could not ignore the effect, the pulse of connection, the awareness of another person fully present. Words faltered, replaced by shared silence, filled with attention, empathy, and an unspoken question: how far could this connection go without stepping past what was appropriate? By the end of the evening, both carried a quiet tension, a mixture of attraction and uncertainty. The vulnerability she had revealed had softened the boundaries between them, creating a shared understanding that was tender, delicate, and unspoken. He left the conversation with a sense of anticipation, a curiosity that had grown into something deeper, a subtle, steady pull toward her that promised the slow, careful unfolding of trust, intimacy, and perhaps something more. The evening had softened into a gentle hush, the city's distant hum fading into a muted backdrop. They found themselves drawn to the balcony, where the warm glow of the hotel's lights mingled with the cool evening breeze. The faint scent of rain lingered in the air, mixing subtly with the warmth of her perfume, a delicate, floral note with just a hint of amber. The combination was comforting, intimate, and entirely her. He leaned against the railing, taking in the quiet street below, but he was acutely aware of her presence beside him. She stood close, not touching, yet the space between them felt charged with a quiet electricity. Their conversation slowed, drifting from stories and memories to gentle observations about the night itself, the stars peeking through clouds, the distant flicker of streetlights reflecting in puddles, the soft rhythm of the city breathing around them. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushed against his arm as she gestured toward a particular view. The contact was brief, accidental, and yet it lingered in his awareness, sending a warmth through his chest that neither had spoken of. He found himself wanting to keep his hand near hers, drawn to the quiet reassurance it brought, yet hesitant, mindful of the delicate balance between closeness and propriety. As the minutes passed, silence settled comfortably over them. The air was thick with unspoken understanding. She shifted slightly, leaning just enough that her shoulder lightly brushed his, the soft fabric of her sleeve resting against his skin. It was a small, unassuming gesture, yet it carried a depth of connection, a shared recognition that they were both present, attentive, and engaged in a moment that belonged entirely to them. He noticed how the subtle details spoke volumes, the way her eyes softened as she looked at him, the slight smile that tugged at the corners of her lips, the gentle way she let her hand rest near his when adjusting her posture. It was all quiet, almost imperceptible, yet loaded with emotional weight. Every small touch, every glance, every pause between words strengthened a bond that was unfolding naturally, patiently, and profoundly. By the time they stepped back into the room, he felt a warmth that lingered long after the physical contact had ended. It was the warmth of shared presence, of mutual recognition, of connection that had begun to grow beyond casual conversation into something deeper. For him, it was a subtle but undeniable shift, the slow, patient rhythm of intimacy that had begun in small gestures, quiet touches, and the soft hum of understanding between two people learning to see each other fully. The night had deepened into a stillness that felt almost sacred. The room, bathed in the soft glow of amber light, seemed to hold its breath, allowing them a quiet space where words could finally reach beneath the surface. He sat across from her, his hands resting loosely on his knees, and found himself studying the subtle contours of her face, the gentle arch of her eyebrows, the faint crinkle at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the softness of her lips as she listened. There was a pause, a silence long enough to feel deliberate, before he spoke. His voice was low, careful, as though every word mattered. He admitted, hesitantly, the admiration he had felt for her since the moment they met, her quiet strength, the way she carried herself, the warmth in her presence that made the world outside feel distant. He spoke of the small gestures that had lingered in his mind, the brief touch of her hand, the way she leaned closer during conversation, the attention she paid to the smallest details. She listened, her eyes holding his with steady intensity. The tension that had been quietly building between them seemed to shift, softening into something more profound. She responded with warmth, acknowledging her own awareness of the connection they shared. Her words were measured, sincere, revealing not only curiosity but a guarded vulnerability, the awareness that while the attraction was real, so too were the boundaries they had carefully maintained. Their hands brushed once more, this time intentionally, as she leaned slightly forward. The contact was brief but loaded, the warmth of her palm against his carrying reassurance, acceptance, and a quiet intimacy. He felt the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the calm steadiness of her heartbeat, and the comfort of proximity that had been building in small gestures for days. In that moment, the emotional weight between them shifted. The hesitation, the unspoken questions, the careful social awareness, all of it melted into a mutual understanding. They did not need to rush, did not need to define what was unfolding. It was enough to acknowledge the feelings simmering quietly beneath the surface, to accept that connection could be patient, respectful, and deeply fulfilling. By the end of the evening, a profound sense of closeness had settled over them. The slow burn of trust, observation, and subtle affection had culminated in an emotional peak that was tender, deliberate, and entirely human. Both knew the journey had only just begun, but for the first time, they recognized that their bond was real, meaningful, and poised to grow in ways neither had expected, quietly, carefully, and with an intimacy that transcended words. The morning light filtered gently through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The city outside had awakened, but inside, the world felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed to match the rhythm of their shared presence. He stood near the window, glancing at the quiet street below, while she moved about the room with her usual calm elegance, making small adjustments, straightening a cushion, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The night's emotional confession lingered between them like a delicate thread, woven silently through every glance and gesture. There was no rush, no urgency, only a gentle awareness of each other, a quiet intimacy built through days of subtle touches, shared laughter, and lingering silences that had grown heavy with meaning. When he turned to face her, their eyes met in a long, steady gaze. There was warmth in her expression, a soft acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that had formed. The brief hesitation before she stepped closer was filled with tenderness, as if both were aware of the delicacy of this moment. Then, without words, she let her arms slide around his waist, her cheek resting lightly against his chest. He felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through the fabric of her blouse, a quiet reassurance of her presence, and instinctively, his hand rested on her back, holding her gently. It was not a dramatic embrace, but the kind that spoke volumes, of trust, understanding, and the deep comfort that comes from being fully seen and accepted. For a moment, the world outside, with its noise and obligations, ceased to exist. In that simple, lingering contact, the slow burn of connection reached its natural, satisfying peak. They separated gently, each step measured yet unhurried. Their smiles were soft, private, and imbued with shared knowledge of what had passed between them. A few small words, "Take care, I'll see you soon," carried a weight far greater than their simplicity suggested, affirming the bond that had grown quietly and steadily, without force or haste. As he prepared to leave the hotel, he felt an unexpected warmth in his chest, a sense of emotional fulfillment that was rare and precious. The subtle touches, the conversations, the shared silences, all had led to this gentle conclusion, a connection both intimate and respectful. She watched him go with a quiet, confident grace, her expression a mixture of serenity and anticipation, hinting that their story, while paused for the moment, would continue to unfold naturally. By the time he stepped out into the street, the memory of her presence lingered, in the warmth of her touch, the soft steadiness of her gaze, and the quiet assurance that, in a world full of fleeting connections, they had found something enduring, patient, and profoundly human. The story had reached its emotional fulfillment, leaving both with the gentle satisfaction of a bond that promised slow, beautiful growth. If you felt the slow burn connection between them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check the link in the description for the full story.